Hey guys, I know I promised this on Friday. I should say, hey, it's me, Mike Taylor. So I am doing this for our little Revit tutorial. However, today I know it was asked for by you guys to do a little SketchUp tutorial, and I think that's a great place to start any project. I know we are doing a Revit class, but SketchUp is also a very powerful little modeling tool. It is not the best modeling tool, but it depends on what you're trying to do. So when I've used SketchUp in the office, which is quite a bit, I've used quite a bit of SketchUp in the office. It's for building little models, little things that are just, think of it like a cardboard model, or a paper model, or whatever you want to think of as a little something you make temporarily and then tear it apart. It's not meant to be a permanent piece of architecture, a permanent piece of a model. It's meant to be kind of test out scenarios, see if it works, see what's good, see if the massing of a building is appropriate, and that kind of thing. If you really like SketchUp, most people suggest moving on to something like Rhinoceros or Rhino for those of us who use a full language. And then Revit, of course, is the kind of high top architectural working drawing, ready to get your design to the contractor all finished up. For now, I think it would be really helpful. I really like SketchUp. When I started using it, 2005, it's changed a bunch, but it's definitely still, the bones are still there. So why don't we just get up and running here? I apologize again. I ran into some challenges with getting access to SketchUp, so apologies for that. I know I said I'd have this done on Friday. It's now Sunday, 5:30 or so. But I think that all being said, why don't we just get started here? So I've already downloaded SketchUp itself. Right now, I've just got the test. What do you call it? The test. It's a 7-day trial. So ignore that for now. You're welcome to try and launch the tutorial if you want. I'm not going to do that today. I'm just going to start modeling and give you guys a couple tips and tricks of things that I really like in the software, and just some fundamental things of, if I was going to get started, what would I do and how would I get there? So let's just get in here and whoops, where's my mouse? There it is. So screen starts up. You say, okay, start modeling. We're good to go. The first thing you're going to see is this little intro screen. It says home. And then we got a couple different types of templates that are kind of baked into the SketchUp interface itself. We've got simple in inches, simple in meters. It's up to you, however you like to work. I typically will either do simple in meters or architectural in millimeters, or architectural in meters. For those of us that are joining from last semester, I had some students from Denmark. If there are other people from all over the world, you're welcome to use whatever standard you'd like. Some people like to draw in centimeters. I would argue in Toronto, in Ontario, most of the time you're doing millimeters and meters, but I leave it to you guys. So for now, let's just click on this architectural millimeters in here, grab this, click it open. It's going to load up for us here. And in every single version of SketchUp, you've always got this little component person that starts. This is Teddy. So definition is Teddy over here. If I click on that little component, it says Teddy. It's untagged. Don't worry about those for now. I'm just going to go ahead and delete this because I think it's just kind of annoying. So bye, Teddy. So this is it. This is the kind of window, the main interface. The big difference between this and, really any other modeling software is we've only got one window. There's no real way that I've seen. I'm just thinking of this right now. There's no real way that I've seen where I've used more than one window, top, side, plan, perspective view. Usually, even in Revit, we can set up 8 windows if we wanted to. We can tab those views to how we want to see, tile the windows, how we want to see the project. This, just the one window, one view. And the first thing I'm going to do is just walk around some of the navigation of SketchUp. I would say it's probably the most intuitive piece of modeling software I've ever used. I really like it. It's awesome. It's not to say you should like it too. Some people hate it because it's kind of dumb. It's not really like a great piece of architectural documentation modeling. So a lot of people would say, well, why would you model it in SketchUp if you could just do it in Revit right off the bat, or Rhino, but Revit being the architectural documentation. So the reason for that is it's quick and dirty. It's quick and dirty. You're ready to rock. You can do lots of things in this. It's very nimble. So let's just go ahead and let's just try and model something real quick. So we'll start with the navigation. Sorry, let's do that first. So a couple things here. Over here on the right, we've got our trays. You can kind of click that. Tray is basically just a kind of series of things that SketchUp uses. Think of it like a set of, it's kind of like our properties palette inside of Revit here. We've got the entity info, which if I click on something, right now I've got nothing selected, but it'll give me a little information on it. We got materials, we got components, we got styles, which if you're really interested, you can modify what the kind of architectural drawing looks like. We'll skip that for now. Tags is really kind of like our layers in AutoCAD. So we'll go through that a little bit. Shadows, self-explanatory, shadows on or off. Scenes, we probably won't talk about scenes today. Instructor, I've personally never used, but this is just a kind of tutorial within SketchUp. So I'm sure that if you do have, questions about what the thing is, if you click on, any of these line tool, rotate, if I click on these, it's going to give me a little update as to what these tools are. So if you don't want to listen to me and you're just like, I don't want to listen to this guy, we can just jump in here and click these tools and see what they look like. I'm going to close that just for 1 second. And to get out of anything, spacebar. So I like to use spacebar. Spacebar is, you click on spacebar, you come back to kind of selection. So I think you can hit escape too, but I don't want to misspeak here. So no, you can't. So you must hit spacebar. Spacebar gets us back to select, and select is the kind of, think of it like our double tapping escape inside of the Revit interface. So useful. Try to get out of any tool that you've got active at the time. So a couple things here. Navigation wise, we select things the same way that we do in Revit. So if you select things, anything within the box, you can select from the top left, you click and drag to the bottom right. You kind of create a window for things that you're trying to select. If you want to select everything, you can go from the bottom right to the top left. You can see how we've got all of these dashed lines for our little square here. And that will select anything that touches these lines. So what I find really fun is really the orbiting and how nimble orbiting and zooming and all this stuff kind of feels inside of the SketchUp interface. So if we go ahead and try that, it's actually scroll wheel. So if we scroll, you can just scroll out a little bit here. I will say that one thing that is frustrating inside of SketchUp is if you are not on an object to scroll, it's really hard to kind of scroll in and scroll out. So you see where I'm scrolling here. It can be a little challenging just to kind of get familiar with the interface. Rotation. So if I hold shift, if I hold the shift key, hold shift, you can see here I can pan. Sorry, I should say hold shift and hold middle mouse button. So middle mouse button will let us pan. Really advanced function here, but super helpful. Just middle mouse button is orbit. So if I hold middle mouse button, I can kind of orbit around here. So zoom, scroll wheel, middle mouse button, orbit, shift, middle mouse button, pan. So those I would say are the kind of main things we're going to be doing. The last one is likely you're going to be using the zoom extents tool. So zoom extents, if you're lost, zoom extents, and we should see the whole map of stuff that we're looking at here. I'm just going to hit that again. So that's the kind of, trying to navigate inside of the software here. If you do feel stuck, I feel like it's the most intuitive of all the softwares to kind of navigate things, that shift and middle mouse button to pan, scroll to zoom, and then middle mouse button to orbit. It's really sweet to kind of get in here and try and model something real quick to see what that looks like. So why don't we start to model something? So what I should say before we do that is you can see these three axes here. So red, red axis is really like our x-axis. So think of it like you remember math class, everybody's favorite, x-axis is red, the y-axis is green, and the blue axis is z. So we've got this x, y, and z axis. Everything's in 3D, super fun, super handy. Just remember that when we are trying to draw things, SketchUp is going to try really hard to guess what we're trying to do. And you'll see that sometimes it can be a little frustrating. So I want us to kind of be patient. Once you get the hang of this, you'll see it's pretty intuitive, but let's just go ahead and let's model ourselves a little cube here. So I know all the, I'm not bragging. I know all the shortcuts. So I want to make sure that you guys can kind of see the shortcuts, but also just use the tools. So right here up at the top, we've got, draw, right? So draw rectangle. So I just hit R. It's just literally so easy just to hit R instead of come all the way here and hit this little rectangle tool. But for us, let's do it this way. So rectangle, click once. You can see here, it's giving me a little preview that I'm in the rectangle tool. You can see this little blue rectangle and a little pen. SketchUp will snap to points. So again, it's going to try and intuit what you're trying to draw. So a lot of this, well, I like it. It's trying to make the software as intuitive as a kind of modeling or a drawing process might be. So if I go ahead, I could just click once and you can see it's locked, and you'll see, oh, you can't see because I'm blocking the view. So I'm going to double tap, I'm going to hit spacebar, get out of this tool for 1 second. I just got to modify. I'm going to move myself up. There, that's better. I think that'll work. So, okay, I do that again. So R for rectangle. And when I start dragging, you should see in the bottom right of my page here, the bottom right over here, we'll see the dimensions of that rectangle. So, how big are we talking? How big is your, I think it's a multi-use residential with the first floor of retail. How big is that first floor? How big is that tower? So on and so forth, right? So even as a starting point, let's just give ourselves a vague idea of how big this site is going to be. I don't know how big your site is, so I'm just going to kind of guess here. We'll call it, what do we want to call it? Maybe, let's call it, that's okay. Let's just go something like this. So one thing is unlike Revit, I find this part is a little bit clunky, but keep an eye on the bottom right here. We could see that if we can instruct what SketchUp would like SketchUp to create this rectangle, we can actually type in the first number and the second number. We can eyeball it. I would recommend you type these numbers. So you can see here I've got 5,000 millimeters by 10,000 millimeters or so. But those are pretty loose. You see 4872 by 10,389. If we want to be tighter on the dimensions, I'm just trying to think of some good dimensions for us here. Why don't we just do 25 meters and then comma 25 meters. Let's just make ourselves a little square. So if I hit enter, you could see here we've got a little rectangle, right? Well, it's a square, but a rectangle and square, we are just creating a four-sided object. And now if I come back and I hit spacebar, you'll see that I'm back to the select tool. So pretty easy, right? Making little shapes here. So you'll notice now I can kind of click on that shape. So this is really important when we're selecting things inside of the SketchUp interface. We can kind of move pieces of the geometry. And this is why I think it's super cool, super helpful, is it can be very quick and dirty, but also really fun just to kind of mess around and learn a little bit about the program itself. So first things first, if I click on the face, I just click once and I click on the face. If I come over here, I can click on, I'm going to zoom in. I can click on an edge. So I can click on the edge. You can see it turns blue when I click on that edge. I can click on this edge, all four of these edges. If I double click, everything is selected. So I can double click anywhere and it's going to select that entire object, right? So faces are separate from edges, right? So this is really important because what can happen is you may or may not want to delete just the face. And I'll kind of show why this is important because it can get a little hairy. So if I just hit delete key on my keyboard, I've now got a hole, right? It's just the edges and no face. So this is really, I remember this being called face-based modeling. So unlike Rhinoceros and Revit, which uses solid-based modeling, right? So face-based modeling, really, you know, I can kind of modify and edit these components of the geometry. I'm just going to hit Control Z here to undo. So I can modify these edges separately from the geometry itself. So for instance, if I wanted to stretch this object, say I wanted to make this, instead of it being 25 meters, I want to make it 50 meters. You can do it two ways. You can either redraw it, or we can actually take this edge and move it. So if I click on this edge here and I come up here to my move tool, move is M for those of us that like the shortcuts. If I hit move here, click once, and I'm going to try, you can see if I've got the snaps are all on by default. So you can see here it's trying to snap to an endpoint or a midpoint or an endpoint and so on. So I'm going to tap just spacebar for 1 second and just click off of that, just so you can see it is, right now there's an object, this is the face. If I want to move the whole piece, I got to click the face. If I want to move just one edge, I can click that edge and move it, so I can kind of drag and move it, but you can see that SketchUp it's saying, are you sure you want to move it over here? So this little black dashed line is kind of off axis. It's off of any sort of axis within SketchUp itself. We do have the blue axis. So if I want to lift it up, you can see I'm kind of trying to keep as vertical in plane, so at that Z axis as I can. And in the bottom right of my screen, you should see that little 16179 and so on. So the more that I kind of pull up or pull down, I can now modify what that looks like. It should also snap to my green axis. You can see that the axis actually turns green, so you know that we're kind of pulling or stretching that edge along the green axis. Or you can shrink it. Right? We can also, it's going to let me, we can also kind of shear it. So shearing means, if I look at this in plan, I'm shearing this whole piece of geometry. So I'm literally just taking that edge and I'm moving it across on the red axis. So what do I really want to do? What I really want to do here, I'm probably just going to try and drag it out to 50 meters or so, right? So let's do 50, and I hit enter, and I know that I'm locked on the green axis because it's highlighting green. If I hit enter, spacebar, and now I can kind of start to see, if I hold middle mouse button, I can orbit around. I can come underneath it. I can come on top of it. I can kind of spin around the object. Again, if I get lost, if I'm in the middle of space, I can hit, not ZE. I am going to hit my zoom extents button up here, zoom extents, and it's going to bring me back down to the real world. Spacebar to get us back to that select tool. Another fun one, so I say fun, is we can move the vertexes or vertices of an object. So still sticking with our little just planar because it's flat, planar geometry here. I can move just a single piece here, so a single vertices. You can't select the vertice though, so I know that this could get a little frustrating, so I do want to show us how to do that. So if I jump up here, I got this little move or M as a shortcut. If I hit that little function here, so move, and if I just select the endpoint here, you can see it's snapping, so it snaps right to that endpoint. Same thing with our axes. If I just click and drag, right? So you can see again in the bottom right, we can see we've got 15, 5, 515 and so on. So I'm dragging along again the red axis. Now I'm dragging along the green axis, right? So I can kind of change that geometry how I see fit, how I want to change it, or along the blue axis. So blue is probably the hardest for points. You can see it's having a hard time understanding. In fact, I don't know if I can. Can I move the geometry? No, I can't, because this is not an object that I can do this with. So this is also a good thing to remember, is that two-dimensional objects that are drawn in a plane, you can't adjust their vertices, because you can imagine in 3D what this would look like trying to fold up a single point. We'd have a lot of triangulation within this geometry, and SketchUp just isn't, I don't want to say it's not smart enough. You can do tessellations and triangulations, but for now, if you're just trying to drag out a point, it's likely just going to be happening in plan. So red axis, green axis, 2 dimensions, and that should be good. So why don't I go ahead, I'm just going to click somewhere here. Let's call it, 5 meters back, right? So this is our little 3D orientation. I should say, if you're somebody who really likes to start a project in, say, a plan view, you can also use the camera for that. So there's a couple different functions in the camera view that we can go up to. And they're kind of default functions. Go up to camera here. We've got standard views, and these are our kind of typical top, bottom, front, back, left, right ISO. So there's, what's that? Seven different views. If you do find yourself that you would rather work in a top, front, back view, this type of thing, you can click on any of these standard views and just get us back to something that you're more familiar with. I hit that little top button here. You can see now I am top, right? So I'm on top, I'm looking down at my plan view, but it doesn't lock anything. If I do want to kind of rotate around, I can do that. So it's never locked to any specific view. You're always in 3D. Excuse me. If you're somebody who really likes to work in, instead of this kind of perspective view, if you really like to work in an axonometric view, which is kind of locks everything to orthographic projection. So if I hit that camera view again and I hit parallel projection instead of perspective, you can see how everything has now, it's no longer in a perspective view. We are in this parallel projection, which some people like. It's up to you. It doesn't really affect anything except the way that your model works and the way that you like to do modeling. So I'm going to swap that back to perspective super quick here. Why don't we draw some more shapes? How about that? Why don't we draw some more shapes? I was going to show you something cool, but I think we'll just draw some more shapes first, and then I'll do the cool thing. So if you're somebody who, instead of drawing this using a rectangular the rectangle tool, we can draw it using a line tool. So why don't I just come up here? I think it might be called, oh no, it's called pen. So, excuse me, it's called line. I was thinking it might be called pen. Line tool. So, lines. So click that line tool. I don't think there's a shortcut for lines. You can make a shortcut if you want. If I start to draw something, why don't we just go ahead, and you could see as I draw, it's trying to snap to the green axis. So again, my bottom right on my page here, I've got, let's call this 50,000. Whoops, 50,000 millimeters, right? One single line. So it's locking into our kind of the axes of this piece here, this kind of our foundational axes, the green and red. So this will become important as we start to draw other lines and things on other faces of geometry within the model. But just for right now, we're just drawing one line. You can see, remember here, this face is really a function of 4 separate lines, this face-based geometry. So with this, I can also just move my line if I want to. So I can move it kind of anywhere. Right now, you can see how sometimes in SketchUp, this can be a little frustrating, is I've moved it up. So I can't move a 2-dimensional plane up, but I can move a single line up. So keep that in mind while we're drawing. One thing that will happen is, this will become important later, is we can't extrude or push lines. So extrusions are, much like in Revit, an extrusion is a kind of face that has been pushed or pulled out of the geometry. So for instance, why don't I just go ahead? I'm going to delete this actually. Let's do this. I'm going to delete this. Delete is the delete key. So if you want to delete something, go ahead and do that. So right now I can't use really anything for this geometry. It's just a kind of series of lines that all surround empty space. This has its uses, but I would also say that typically we want to see a face that we can manipulate, that we can do something to. So how do we get these, if I'm selecting a couple of these, how do I get this back to a face? Really, the simplest way that I do it is I can either just redraw an edge of this to get us our face back, or we can kind of draw a cross line over the whole face to get us back. And I'll show you what that looks like. So if I just select this one edge here, delete it, and then I come back up to the line tool. Whoops. The line tool. And I'm going to see how it snaps. I'm going to snap straight to an endpoint, second endpoint, click, and then now we've got our face back. Right? I'm going to go ahead and delete this again. Another thing that we can do is if you want to draw across a midpoint, say for instance, you can draw anywhere, but it will actually split the face into two faces, and this also has its uses. So why don't I go ahead and do that? So you can see just on edge, and then on edge, I haven't actually picked the midpoint, but I'm just going to pick on edge here. If I click again, it should give me a full face. So now I've got two separate faces on the same piece of geometry here. So why is that important? Well, it's actually, not only is it split the faces, it's also split the lines. So the lines are now split as well. Instead of having 4 lines, we actually have, 6 lines to make up this geometry. It also means that if I'm going to move this vertex again, you can see how it's flexing, kind of. It's flexing at this point, right? So we've kind of trimmed it, and then now we've got this piece of geometry that's now 2 separate faces. And if I delete this middle one, this will be important, is that even though we deleted the middle one, we've got one whole face, but the lines, we still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines that make up the kind of perimeter of that object, right? Some other fun things. I think what I might do is let's just jump into do we want to rotate something? I think rotate's pretty self-explanatory, but why don't we just go ahead and rotate this? There's a couple cool things that can happen when you rotate things. If you just want to rotate, here, let's rotate the whole object first. I'm going to rotate the whole object, select everything. So, I can either double click. Double click will give me just one portion. And then if you triple click, you'll get the whole object. So double click, double click. If I click on the outside, double click, I'll get the whole thing. If I triple click, 1, 2, 3, then I get everything. So I'm triple left clicking and I get the whole object here. Okay. Conversely, I can select, if I just select using the window, I'll just get the bottom and this top piece here. If I use the bottom right to top left, anything that hits that edge, it will select for me. You should try that out. Super helpful when we're doing small buildings, big buildings, all that fun stuff. So next things next, we've got rotation. So select everything, and the rotate tool is hanging out right here. So rotate, you'll get a little double-sided protractor. Very similar, we can rotate things in different dimensions. So for us, we are now kind of in the red-green axis for rotating. So if I wanted to rotate this whole object here, if I click once, it's going to give me the kind of reference center point, the reference point for the whole rotation. So you're rotating about the point that you select when you start. So if I click once here at our kind of origin point, it's going to give me, okay, what would you like the reference to be? And for us, we probably want to keep it, again, it's going to snap, but we probably want to keep that reference to around this edge. If I click a second time, and now I'm free to rotate. Again, in the bottom right corner, you'll see the angle. If I want to rotate 15 degrees, I can type 15, hit enter, and now I've rotated 15. If I wanted to rotate about, say, this point, I can click here, click a second time, you can see similarly, I'm rotating, let's call it 90 degrees. It's probably a more common one. Hit enter. All right. So what's happened? We're just rotating about this plane. If I want to move everything back, I can simply come, hit that move function, pull it back to my origin. Hit spacebar. Now we've got something. I don't know if it's good, but we got something. Second piece of rotate, this may or may not be helpful, is that we can rotate the lines of a piece of geometry, right? So if I just wanted to rotate certain portions of this, so let's say I want to rotate this, let's see what we get if I rotate this line. So I'm going to try. You can see here, we're now rotating about that point. You can see how I'm shifting the kind of other edge of that piece. Right? So could be fun. Depends what you're trying to do. Again, this is really just a kind of quick and dirty design tool. It can be used to quickly mass something. So quickly create a little massing model, we call them. And then you can also take that model and throw it into Revit, and there can be really clean integration between the SketchUp and Revit interfaces. Okay, cool. So let's try some other things. So you know what? I know you guys are really focused on just the massing part itself, right? So why don't we just go ahead and why don't we start to make a mass, period. Let's see if we can make a little massing for our little structure here. And why don't I go ahead and I'll show you the push-pull or the extrusion tool, and that lives up here. So this is our little push-pull. And again, I can select a face, right? We've got two faces here. I'm really looking to push or pull just a singular face. What I'm going to show you this first is that, let's do this. Okay. We'll push-pull, grab that push-pull tool. If I hover over one of these faces and I click once, and I can drag out some sort of geometry, right? So if I'm making a big, tall building, right? So you can see here over on the right, I've got 140 meters or so. So let's call it, we'll call it roughly 3 meters a story. And let's call it 40 meters. So let's call it 120 meters, right? Second one, why don't we just pull it up and we'll give ourselves, let's call it, at 4 or 5, we'll call it 5 meters a story. Let's call it 20 meters. So for 4 stories, a little podium. And now you can see we've started the process of kind of creating a little rough, very rough massing model, right? So one thing that might be important here to know is that now every single one of these faces exists separately inside of our model. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we've got all these faces hanging out. And similar to what we were just doing, we can start to, how we created this little kink in our two-dimensional box. We can actually start to create little kinks inside of our three-dimensional box. But before we do that, why don't I just show you how powerful some of these push-pull tools can be. So let's say, for instance, we want to make a modification to the edge of our building over here. Maybe we want to just push it in a little bit. So there's a reason it's called push-pull. Very intuitive. Hover over any face. I'm going to hover over this face, and you can see I'm pushing in. I want to show you guys this because this can be very frustrating. So remember when we created that geometry from the top, right? However, think about this from a 3D perspective. As we push this face in, it's actually getting wider. The actual building is getting wider, but that face remains the same, right? So this can be a little frustrating when people are using the software. You can see here, if I just push it in, let's call it 10 meters or so, just as an example, and you go, but I don't want that. Why is this like this? This is so frustrating. And you're like, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to delete this edge here. Delete. And now we're missing the whole face of our building. So I want us not to get frustrated, but there are definitely some challenges in SketchUp. So making sure that when we are modeling, we want to model things in a certain in a certain way. And so a different way to do this, and I'll show you guys what this looks like. A different way to do this, let's say we wanted to cut 5 meters off of our building. I'm going to undo those. So I'm going to tap undo twice. Let's say we wanted to do this a slightly different way. You can't really push pull that edge. It doesn't really work how we want it to. So I'm going to suggest that we actually, cut the piece off. So let's go ahead and I'm going to copy this line. So I'm actually going to copy this line over. And copying is a little tricky. It's not as intuitive, I would say, as other software. So you actually have to use the move tool. So you can see move, copy, or distort. So if I'm going to select my one edge here and I'm going to copy it. So click that little copy piece here. And you actually hit Control. And now you see that little plus sign show up. I don't know what that second one is, but the first one here, that plus sign, click, and I'm just going to move it over. Let's move it over by 5 meters or so. So you can see here, it doesn't actually meet all the way. It doesn't actually meet all the way with that edge. That's okay. But why that's important is now we've actually split one piece of the geometry of whatever this podium looks like into 1 and 2. But on this side, we've just got one piece. So what we need to do is we actually need to get this edge all the way over. For me, the fastest way to do that is just really to draw another line. And I'll show you what that looks like. So if we just quickly draw a line, draw once, and you'll see purple is actually to say, is it in parallel to that original line that we've drawn? So you can see this parallel edge turns purple if I'm on the right. If I'm not on the right one, it doesn't give it to me. So if I'm on the right one, purple, I'm going to come all the way over here and I'm going to click once. And you can see even the kind of style of the drawing has changed. So see, we've got a kind of buff, bold line now. And we're going to, if we drag it across and click once, you can see it's become skinny. And what that means is we've actually now got, if I hit spacebar, we've got 2 faces here, which is what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to delete this one real quick and come back to our push pull. Let's grab this, click once, and we can drag it all the way down. It should disappear. Should disappear, but that tells me there's something wrong with the original geometry. So this is something that does happen. This is what makes SketchUp quick and dirty. Is it's not a perfect modeling tool. So that looks okay. But now we've got this hole in the bottom of our building. So one thing we can do just to close that hole is come back to our line tool, click once, click twice, delete that, we're back in action. Just be mindful that it's not perfect. Sometimes little errors can happen in the geometry, usually user-based. I'm sure that I did something there that wasn't quite correct, but you just kind of glue it back together, guys. And I mean that it's if you are spending an exorbitant amount of time on something, just think about the value of, would it have been better time spent to do it in Revit? So for us, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, building a little quick SketchUp model, no problem. But you're not going to spend 4 months on one of these models. That's just the reality. I don't think that that's going to take place. Quick little SketchUp models, half a day, full day, couple days even maybe if you're doing some quick massing models. But this is not a full piece of architectural documentation. What else can we do here? So maybe you want to put a little, fence on the top of our building here. And if we wanted to do that, we can actually jump up here to our little offset tool. And right now what I can do is actually offset the edge, right? So it's actually going to offset the edge of the face so that it's detecting right now that I've got this face that I want to offset. If I click once, it's going to let me choose how much of an offset do I want. Let's call it 600. So 600 millimeters, hit enter. And now we've got, again, 2 faces, right? So again, back to face-based modeling. If I click this face and delete it, my building is hollow. There's nothing, this is not solid base modeling, it's face-based modeling. So everything needs to have a face to it. If I jump up here and I can actually just hit P is for the push-pull. I can click here and I can actually just drag this up a little bit. So let's drag it up. Let's call it 6 meters, a little big penthouse enclosure here, something like this. Do the same thing down here, 600. Whoops. We'll drag it up. What did I say? Let's just call this 2,500 or so. All good. Right. Starting, little massing model, little fun. One thing we can do is, because these are all kind of glued together, right now, say I wanted to change the overall height of this building, and I'm like, oh man, I can't believe I just did this goof here. A couple of different ways we can come back and fix this is I can come back and hit that push pull, delete the face, and now we have our face back. If I wanted to drop this down by, let's say we made our building too high, let's drop it down by 18 meters. It's going to push pull it down by 18 meters or so. Do the same thing down here. Why don't I just pull this back up? Whoops. Oh, I should say, if you hold shift while you're selecting something, you can select other objects as well. This can be really helpful. Shift is, if you hold shift while you're clicking, shift is how we kind of deselect and select things. If you only want to select new things, you hold control, delete that. Now we've got a nice little Sketchup model hanging out. If I wanted to extend this again, I can also just move it out. Let's just do this real quick, right? Rather than do that funky jazz I was doing before. So what if I wanted to move this edge? Let's see what we can do here. If I pull this, make a new edge here, make a new edge down here, click this edge, I should, oh, no, I can't. So this is one thing that will happen is things can kind of get glued together. So if you do find that this part is frustrating, what we can do is we can actually model two separate, a podium and a tower, say for instance, rather than modeling these two pieces together. So you can see here, this isn't quite doing what I would want it to do. In my only real shot at making this, if I wanted to change this and not have it, if it's coplanar, it's going to try and glue it together. So right now this face and this face are kind of glued together in 2D space. You can see here, if I grab just the vertex, it's going to let me do some fun nonsense, which we do not want to do. But just so you guys can see that if that is frustrating, there is likely a better way to do it than this. So just tap escape, go back to spacebar. And what I'll do right now is I'm actually going to cut it back. So let's do this. So see that purple? Grab that line. And what I'll do up here is I'm actually just going to trim off a piece. And again, I'm going to move copy along this edge. And it should give me a second piece here. Trim that, pull it all the way down. Now we've got a nice little setback on that edge. And if we wanted to, we can also now start to mess around. It's no longer glued to that face. It is, however, glued to this face. So just make sure when we're doing this stuff that be aware of the things that you're glued to. It can be really fun just to kind of mess around. Again, if you like the shape of a building, if you like the shape of something you're working on, just to get a feel for what this software, the power of the software, what it can do. It's really just about creating faces and then manipulating those faces. So you can see here, I'm going to, oh, it's not going to let me. If I pull this out, right, all these fun, little things. So there can be times when, if you're like, oh, I really hate the way that this line looks, if I click this and delete it, it's going to open up that whole building. We don't want that. So just be mindful when we're doing certain modifications here that if you do lose a face, you can easily get that face back by just simply creating a new face, right? So blam, I just drew a little line over there. But yeah, so some fun stuff happening inside of SketchUp. So let's say, for instance, we wanted to create a kind of hole at the midpoint here of this building. So that push-pull tool can also help us create holes in the building, if that makes sense. Right now, if I wanted to kind of carve a hole into this building, it's hard for me to kind of, I'm just going to eyeball something. But what we could do is say, okay, let's draw from here to here. And let's say I wanted to, for some reason, I wanted to see kind of objectively where my floors were going to approximately be. It's really hard for us to imagine, based on this shape, what that 3 meters per floor looks like. So sometimes in a model, you might want to show every single floor. In this case, we're going to say it's about 3 meters of floor plate per floor, excuse me. So right now I've kind of got those 1, 2, 3, 4 sides selected of that piece here. So I'm going to click once, control click again, control click a fourth time, excuse me. And then if I hit that our little move button here, move, and I hit control, I can come up by 3 meters, hit enter. And now what Revit is what SketchUp's really good at is kind of trying to figure out what you meant to do. Sometimes this is amazing, sometimes it's infuriating. So be aware that it is trying to do what you want, what it thinks you want it to do. So for instance, you saw me do that 3 meters there. If I try and do the same thing again, you can see I'm just going to pull up a little bit. It's going to say, oh, did you want to do 3 meters? Like, no, I want to do 4 meters or whatever. So SketchUp is going to try really hard to try and emulate what you've just done. Is this a good way to build a little massing model? Maybe, right? So maybe one thing I should show you is that now every single one of these floors is its own little face. So this can be helpful or not helpful. It depends what kind of aesthetic you're going for. Inside of Revit, I would actually guess that we probably just want these faces, right? We probably just want the faces because then we're actually going to do our mass floors inside of Revit itself. But I figured maybe it's a little helpful just to see what some of these things look like. Okay. Yeah, one thing that might be helpful is also something that, excuse me, a little drink water here. One thing that might be helpful is, I always found helpful anyways, is to create things inside of either groups or components. We're already getting into a kind of higher level SketchUp interface piece here, but I do think it's important to understand this stuff if you are going to be modeling in it, that you can kind of mess around inside of. Just this is going to really link all of our faces together all the time. So that can be a little bit like, I would love if these two things were separate. So what I'll do now is I'm just going to actually duplicate this. So move it over by, one thing that I like to do is keep things, if I'm going to duplicate them, keep them a kind of set distance apart in case I want to modify anything at a later time. So for instance, if I just want to start with my podium. So let's say I want to just get rid of this whole tower here, pull this all the way down and delete all this junk. And now I've got just my podium. Everything is still face-based, but one thing we can do is if we triple click, we've got the whole object selected. So everything is selected on all sides. And then I can right click and I'm actually going to use the make group. So make group will kind of make a little container for all of the geometry in what would be the podium for us. So we can make a little group here and it just makes it so it doesn't stick to everything else. So I'm going to hit this make group here. And one thing you will see is that it's created a box around the geometry. Think of this like a bounding box in Photoshop. It's kind of a rectangular box along the same axis that we're using, the kind of default axis here. So now what can happen is if we double click inside the box here, this is now living in its own little space. So I can't touch anything outside of my little group here. So super quick, if I right click, I can edit the group. And now this kind of lives in its own little space, temporal space dimension, which is fun. If we want to get out of it, we're like, man, why did I do that? That was so stupid. I can hit explode here and we're back to brass tacks. So for now, I'm just going to do that again. Right click, make group. So what I'd like us to do is grab, the rest of this. So why don't I just super quick here, I'm going to, actually, let's do a little line first. I'm going to grab my little tower, copied over by, I know that's supposed to be 1,000 or 100,000, but now you'll see that I don't have the bottom piece. So how am I going to close that off? Just going to draw another line here. Triple click, right click, make group. And now I'm going to drag it over here. Whoops. You be very, very careful with how things are being put on our buildings. I think this is correct. Yeah. So right now, same building, but built slightly differently. So this is really important when it comes to, you're building something and you're like, man, why is it sticking together? Oh my goodness. And so now we've got these two groups hanging out, and unlike our little piece here, where if I try and make a manipulation to this and it's just going crazy, right? Here, I can come over here and just modify a piece, for instance, right? So it really helps to isolate these things. If I grab just the face instead, maybe we do that. It just helps to isolate things, helps to contain them, based on a kind of geometry if you want, or based on a program inside of the architecture itself, just to make sure that you can kind of split off and keep things, separate. Same thing if I wanted to rotate, let's try and do this. If I want to rotate just this top piece, right? I've selected, I should make sure I select this one here. If I try and rotate this little tower right on our little building, if I hit rotate here, actually that worked out okay. I thought it was oh, no, it didn't. There it is. So you could see here that it's grabbing, it's really gluing all of our pieces together, which, looks cool. I'm mostly like a purely rectilinear kind of architect, but we've got here this kind of fun little piece here. If I do the same thing over here, what we can do is grab it and rotate it. Right, so it doesn't actually touch anything. It's not really glued together. That's the easiest way for me to kind of convey it, is that it's not glued together. So we should also make sure that none of the pieces touch before we create that component. So for instance, if I try and create, here, let's do this one more time. I'm going to copy this over 200,000. So if I try to make this little top piece a group, okay, that actually worked okay. So, and now on the bottom, let's make a group here. Let's see. Okay, that actually worked out okay. But we are still missing our bottom piece. So there's all sorts of different ways to make this happen. One thing is, I'll share this with you guys. Again, pretty advanced stuff, but I do think that this is one of the most important things inside of SketchUp. I don't have the shortcut set up. This is one of my favorite shortcuts, and I think everybody should use this shortcut. So I'm going to show you how to set this up. It's going to be basically hide rest of model. So how do you hide the rest of your model? And if I just jump in here, I think it's in, where are my shortcuts? Where are my shortcuts? I promise you this exists. Tools. It's an edit. Where are my preferences? Give me 1 second here, guys. I'm just looking for, must be tools. Window preferences, excuse me. So there's a bunch of different things that we can kind of look at here. So this also reminds me of something else we should make sure that we've got on. For us, I think it's probably okay for now, but window preferences, and I'm going to jump down to my shortcuts and give us a filter here. It's going to be, hide rest of model. So hide rest of model. So this is it. So H is usually the one that I use. or H is usually the one that I use. It's going to override our pan. So I don't usually use H to pan. I usually use Shift and middle mouse button. But if I hit this shortcut here, it's going to say, oh, it's used for pan. I say, yes, sure. H. It's all good. You do not have to do this, but I'll show you why it's super helpful. If I hit OK here, and now I'm going to jump into try and editing this, and you're like, oh, okay, why is this stupid thing in the way? So we can imagine that our models may or may not get slightly more complicated as kind of time moves on. And one thing that can be helpful is that little shortcut that I've just done. If I click in here and I hit H, it's going to hide everything else in the model. So I can just focus on the one thing that I'm trying to model. I use this a lot in Rhinoceros, and I use it a lot in Sketchup just to kind of give us a sense of how we're modeling things. Can be the same for any of these. For this, we don't, this can also be another reason why we like to model things inside of these groups, right? So remember that if you've got it on, it kind of automatically stays on. So you're like, oh man, why is my hide rest of model on? You got to hit that H again and get out of it. Otherwise, it kind of is the toggle, so it'll stay on for the duration of your kind of jam here. So cool. We've got, what's next? We've got one thing is our layers. I think that's probably a good thing to talk about. So SketchUp will default to untagged. So anything that lives in the untagged family or untagged geometry. I'm not really sure what else to call it. So untagged is the tag. These used to be literally called layers, and then they changed it for some reason. So I don't exactly know why. This is like 10 years ago they changed it, and everybody had their own opinions. But I'll give you some examples here. Typically when I start a project, and this can be very good to set up early on, is, I'm talking like one of the first things that you should do. I wanted to jump into the tools because I find the layering thing is kind of tedious, but and I want you guys to try it out. But as you get more into the actual modeling of this, it's good to set up a kind of series of layers, much like you would in AutoCAD. You don't need to have like 1,000 layers. It's probably good to have it like 10 layers to start. And I should just give you some brass tacks on this. We are going to do a couple of them. So let's just do a little plus here. The plus kind of gives us, the tags themselves. And you can turn them on and off, but why don't we just go ahead and let's rename, give it to me. Yeah, just double click. And what I like to do, this is totally up to you. Started doing this fairly early on because it can be really challenging to keep things kind of organized. So there are no collapsed layers. There are no kind of buckets. There are no ways to kind of keep layers. Anyways, this is the most organized that I can imagine doing it. So I like to do things like 3D, and we'll call it 3D podium. And then we'll do 3D tower, right? And we might have one called import CAD, just for instance, right? Right click, we'll delete these. Hilariously enough, that is a new feature. I just did that kind of intuitively. The right click and deleting of more than one tag simultaneously is a new feature. You used to have to delete every single tag independently, and it drove everyone just out of their minds. So it's all good. So we've got untagged, import, 3D tower, 3D podium. And much like how layers work inside of AutoCAD, we've now got the ability to say, if I click on this, it's showing me in my entity info in my default tray, that I've got untagged. So I can just drop this down and say, okay, 3D podium, that's cool. And then this one, I'm going to say 3D tower. So now, visibility wise, we are ready to rock, right? So 3D tower, 3D podium, toast. What happens if I turn off untagged? I can't. So not allowed. You can't turn off untagged because it's current. So the way that we kind of draw things, we can either draw everything in the layer itself. So if I double click here, this is going to give me the layer that I'm currently using. I would say this isn't the most clear tool. And then I can right click here, and if I delete this, oh, it's not going to let me. So apparently I can't delete the tagged. So that's okay. So I can't delete untagged. Can I delete this one? Yes. Typically import. So I like to label things import, things like AutoCAD, things like Revit, things maybe you're working back and forth between models, testing things out. You can organize things. So that's why I kept that little 3D in front, is because I like to keep things that are modeled versus things that are imported versus things that are, material references, maybe things that are objects in space, like from the SketchUp warehouse, are all separate. One thing I will say is that tags can be nested, it's called. So think of it like a nested layer or a nested tag. It's up to you how you want to do this. I'll give you an example. So why don't we just do 3D faces? I'll give you an example. I wouldn't typically do it this way, but you might want to do this for, say you're doing a piece of, some piece of, what do I want to say? Of diagramming. You want to do it this way. So if I double click on my little group here, we've got all of these faces within the group are untagged, right? So maybe what I want to do is I want to come in here, and I could do this two ways. If I say, okay, 3D faces, let's do lines. It'd be easier to select the faces. So 3D lines, and then I'm going to come back in here, hit my H, going to select all of the faces, blam, blam, blam. And I'm going to set those to 3D faces. I'll do the same thing for my geometry down here. Triple click, and I will make everything lines. And then I'm going to come in here and control. And make those all 3D faces. So now what happens? So if I click untag now, only my original piece here, so these are all untagged. And these are all living in the 3D lines and faces. You can put them in whatever tag you want. I'm just showing you this because, say for instance, you want to turn off the tower, but keep the podium, or you want to keep the podium. Whoops, you can't hide the current tag. So I'm going to jump back to double click on my untagged here. Actually, I'm going to double click on my import. I'm going to turn off the untagged. So now I can turn off my tower, my podium, vice versa. If I wanted to, I could also turn off the lines, right? Turn off the lines, turn off the faces. So some people like the kind of aesthetic of having this little wireframe. That's cool, right? So, it's up to you. You can kind of mess around with it, see what it looks like. What else should we do here? I personally like the... one of the tools here we can do is the way that things are. How does it work? It's been a long time since I've used this software, so here, let's do this super quick here. So parallel projection. Say you don't like the perspective here, we can change this to, parallel projection. Super fun, right? If I wanted to come down to a street view and imagine what this looked like on a street, I can jump down here and go view and camera. And let's do 2-point perspective. And now it's really giving us, this 2-point perspective, which these could be great, guys. So like in the office, if you're doing something real quick and your boss says, or you say, I need to grab a quick rendering or a quick hand sketch. Imagine that, a hand sketch. You can literally do a quick little model inside of SketchUp and trace this. I would encourage you to do more tracing. I know it's not super well received when it comes to tracing, but I guarantee you nobody's going to ask, was this traced? They don't care. They want the final product. They want the thing done. It can be an excellent way to start a project with a little hand sketch. And the hand sketch, you're going to need some context. You're going to need some idea of how tall this building is going to be. You're not doing it from your mind's eye. You're going to be using a reference material. And this can be a quick little sketch you can make up, notably SketchUp, right? So that's our little perspective. Let's just go back to perspective. Oh, I should say that the 2-point perspective here can kind of mess up if you get out of the view. So as soon as I shift out of it, it shifts back to regular perspective. So I'll leave that on for now, perspective. Rad. Okay, cool. So that is another thing. And then I was thinking about You know what? One thing I didn't do was show you how to put a hole in a building. So I don't know if you're going to need to do this, but let's check this out. So double click here. I'm going to just draw a circle on the face. Let's draw a quick, my little drop down here. I got circle. Let's draw a big hole in our building. You can see as soon as I drew that circle, it's now giving me two separate faces. Right? Oh, I should also say, back to our intuition, our intuitive part of SketchUp here. If I am trying to draw a two-dimensional object on a face, you can see how it's so smart. It's so smart, guys, trying to figure out which face would you like to draw on. You can see how if I'm drawing on this face, or I come up here and then I shift, and then it says, oh, you want to draw on this face? Or I come over here. Oh, look how smart that software is. It's so great. Over here, hanging out, draw a little hole, and let's pop it all the way through. Isn't that fun? So is this going to work? Let's see. It's probably going to give me an error, but that's okay. I think it is going to give me an error, but that's okay. I'll show you how to fix it. So if I go ahead and I'm going to delete the edges here. Yeah, that's the error. Well, now I've got a hole in my building. Congratulations. You've got a hole in your building, but it doesn't go anywhere. This face-based modeling thing is nonsense. So undo that real quick. Keep the hole. We're getting into intermediate stuff here. If I double click my cylinder that I've drawn into my space here, and I'm going to control click the face of that building, right click, and I'm going to come down here and say intersect faces with selection. And now delete the rest of it, delete this hole. Ta-da! Super fun, right? Super fun little, I've got a hole in my building. I'm not sure what it's for. Maybe it's for pigeons. And because I've got my hide selected turned on. So that's how you draw a hole in your building, if that's really what you want to do. If you want to get rid of it, this comes back to our face-based modeling. If you want to get rid of it, you literally are going to select the cylinder and hit delete. And now it's gone. So it's a really weird way to model, guys, just so that everybody knows that it's not like, I keep coming back to this. It's for quick and dirty models. You are likely going to do this. You're going to do 1,000 iterations of one massing, and then you're going to start working on the one that you choose. Yeah. So I think that is probably the coolest thing. So I should do this too, actually. A couple things here. I'm realizing I had way more content than I was planning on, so that's okay. So one thing is the tape tool. So tape tool is just up here. The tape measure tool is literally just a way to measure things. Say you've drawn something and you've forgotten how long it is for whatever reason. You can come back in here and just say, okay, tools tape. Where's my tape tool? Tape measure. So shortcut is T, but it will actually just let me see, okay, how long are these things? Did I actually make this the size that I wanted to? Really helpful just to measure some things, to hang out with them. That sort of thing. What are you? Oh, pan. What else should I show you? So I know how much you guys know I love color. There is also a kind of materials palette in here. So for us, inside of the materials tray, if I just click down here, materials, we have color. Where's color? Colors. So colors, we got thousands of colors, right? So what we can do is we can come in here and the shortcut is B for paint bucket. So bucket is the shortcut. But let's say we want to make this a wonderful color of teal. And I just come in here and I can start to, because these are now grouped, I'll show you that again. Because these are now grouped, I can either paint things by face, inside of my piece, right? Or I can just quickly do, because it's a group, I can come back in and just do it that way. Up to you, however you want to do it. Why this is important is if I want to come, I should do this first. I'm going to do that. Let's undo my coloring book here. So I'm going to undo all these colors. B, make it pink instead. Control click, and I'm going to copy these over just a little bit and say I want to make these ones red now. Instead, for my third iteration, I will do a nice, nice beautiful yellow. You can see how there might be some great value, right? So we got option 1, option 2, option 3 in the office. Maybe you're saying, we've got these 3 towers. Which one are we choosing? Maybe it's as simple as, we're making some modifications to the shapes of the building itself, right? So, this one's got a bigger floor plate. It's massive. This one's going to be a little skinny tower, but maybe we do some fun things like we actually rotate this edge here. We pull this out, right? So just to give us an idea of some things that we can do using, just a couple quick actions here. And let's do a green one. Maybe I don't like this. Maybe I'm going to do a totally different tower. Oh, I should say this as well. So I'm realizing there's one thing here. So you can actually reference other elements. So right now in our push-pull tool, we've got some push-pull, and we can reference how high do we actually want this? Or we can just know. Right click, I'm going to group it in there. And it's currently I'm modeling on import CAD, so careful with that. Tower, let's make sure that I've got this on the default untagged. So you can see how things can get pretty hairy. If you want to copy a color, you hold Alt, get that color back. So check this out. So because I've built these all on different, even though they're all different colors, we got 4 different models in here. Turn off the towers, turn off the podiums, turn off the faces. Oh, I see. So we see that the error of my ways is that this should actually have been modeled on the correct tag. So I'll just make these 3D faces now, jump back in here. Look at that, 3, 4 different modeling options, super quick, right? So again, these aren't supposed to be super developed models. They can be, but they're not supposed to be super developed models. And they can be really fun just to mess around with. One thing that we can do is say, for instance, I would like to keep 2 of these. Sorry, let's start over. Say I wanted to keep the podium the same in both iterations of some model that I'm building. I can hit, I'm going to control click, copy this. So remember control and then move. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to delete this actually. So right now this is a group, which we know, right? So this is a group, this is a group. That's cool. I'm actually going to explode this. So remember, right click, explode, select again, and I'm going to make this into what's called a component. So components make up a stellar part of the SketchUp environment. And a component is basically a block, or in Revit, it is a, what's it called? It's called a component. So it's, a family component. And what it'll let us do is keep things kind of copied, right? So we've got a copy of a copy. And if we want to keep the podium the same across 2 different iterations, or we want to keep the floor plate the same across 2 different iterations, this is the tool that's going to let us do that. So I'm going to hit that Make Component button, and I'm going to call it Podium. Whoops, I'm going to spell it correctly. Podium. I'm going to hit Create, right? So, unfortunately, I've tagged it incorrectly. So let's make sure we've got everything. Oh, I see. Are we good? 3D faces, yes. So make sure, always check. It can be really easy to forget the things that we've tagged correctly. So let's keep it green. Come over here, control click, move it over. So now what I can do is, if I want to modify the base here, so you can see here, if I click on either one of these podiums, the green podiums, if I change it, why don't we create a big opening here? So let's do it this way, a little offset. Let's do an offset of 2000, something like this. I'm going to push it in. you can see it's updating as we speak, right? So everything updates together. But if I make any modifications to my upper level here, I can jump in here, change the height, and everything kind of stays consistent. If I, again, come over, make another change, I can change this. Let's pull this out, right? So say, for instance, you just want to make modifications to the podium, but you just want to make modifications to the tower, but you don't want to change the podium. This can be an efficient way to change one element instead of both. So group on top, podium on the bottom. You might be asking yourself, what if I want to group components? Then you can also do that. I'm going to undo all that. I hate the way that looks. So you're like, oh, okay, cool. What if I wanted to have a nested group? So now I've got a component on the bottom and a group on top. Right click, make group. And now I've got this group, and then it's got a group and a component. So you might want to do that. You might not. You just right click to explode it. One thing you might want to do is if you've got a component that you like the way that it's shaping up, but you want to kind of create a little bit of a change, we can right click and hit the make unique. So make unique will create a kind of sub version, a subtype of that component that you've created. So this is really more of like a design tool I should start with. You totally can use it just to kind of get some ideas out. For me, one really powerful thing to do, which I'll cover in a different video, is to import some CAD geometry and start to trace out what you want your building to look like. So most projects will have a, survey at a minimum. Maybe they've got some existing plans somewhere. And you can use that. You can actually file import into the file import. Where did my screen go? Oh, it's thinking. File import, and then we can get some additional information. Here I've just got reference drawings. It's not going to help us. So it's like my example on Friday last week. It's not really going to help us right now. But you can import CAD. You can import literally all of these files. So we've got Google Earth, JPEGs, Photoshop. For most, you can import Revit. But for most of us, I would guess we're probably either going to be importing AutoCAD or PDFs. Is PDF in here? No, there's no PDFs. You have to do JPEG. So if you do have PDFs, you have to convert them to a JPEG and import them. That can be pretty tedious, but it does happen. The AutoCAD files you can snap to, which are pretty sweet. So if you do have an existing set of drawings from an AutoCAD file, that could be pretty awesome to get at. Anywho, so that is a kind of crash course, super quick into SketchUp. I really wanted to get us kind of up and running. So maybe if we do have questions next week, I do want you guys to check out this video. I realize it's a touch over an hour. I'm going to try and keep them shorter. This is just because I know that if you are interested in SketchUp, it's a super powerful tool. I didn't cover everything. I tried to get us just in the world of massing somewhere. So hopefully this has been helpful. I say hope, but hope is not a strategy. So I wish you guys good luck in the second week of school now. I'm happy to say that we'll see each other I'm happy to say that the strike was averted, so that's good. And I'm happy to see you guys on Friday. I'm going to try and do more virtual recordings because I feel like it's helpful to kind of go back and check because I can't be there with you in person to kind of evaluate what your problems are or what have you. This is probably the best bet for us. You're now getting more familiar with me. I get to know you guys a little bit, just an hour a week. And I'll post this video, which you of course won't see until it's posted. But that being said, why don't we'll hang out again and we'll see how you guys are progressing with Studio. I did get some notes from Professor Guido about what D&D looks like. So I'm going to try and cater your questions towards that. I know there's definitely some help from the Revit department there if you do have questions, but I'm also here, and Jason is amazing. So, I hope you have questions that for those classes, those 3-hour classes, that hopefully he can get to those questions. And yeah, so that's it. Oh, I should also say, when we save things, I'm realizing just one last thing. We should be mindful of where we're saving things. So save as, make sure you save it somewhere, give it a title. Sketchup files are .skp. For anybody who is curious, if you do see a .skp file, that is a Sketchup file. Yeah, so I hope that's good. And we will see you guys on Friday, hopefully. Okay, chat soon. Thanks so much, guys. Bye-bye.